All right, so welcome, folks. Live stream. Today's my first time attempting to have a guest. We have Joe here. Let you just share real quick who you are, what you do.
Sure. So I'm Joe Xian. For some reason, people are worried about how to pronounce my last name, so I like to throw that out there before I get other things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm currently the co-director of research at Autism Partnership Foundation. And through the foundation, we get to do lots of different research activities, and me and Justin kind of co-direct and oversee our research department with Julia Ferguson and Christine Milne, who I think might be watching this, I hope, at least.
Nice.
And also co-authors on the paper that we're going to talk about. But I think it's mainly what I get to do is scratch lots of interests and lots of research interests, because we're a nonprofit and we have lots of people that have donated generously to allow us to pursue a lot of different research lines without having to worry about funding or obtaining funding from, grants and all of that type of stuff. So outside of that, I'm also adjunct faculty at Endicott College. I teach in their PhD program, history of behavior analysis, and the wide applications of behavior analysis outside of autism, developmental disabilities, etc.
Sweet. Yeah, I've actually had an opportunity to tour the center down there. Fantastic stuff that you all do. I'm going to share real quick just a couple things for viewers. So first of all, this is the article that we're talking about. I'm not going to share the details of it. It is freely available. You can go out, you can check it. It's in the link in the description down below. There are also a number of different authors here. I just know Joe a little bit more from inviting him out to a past event and things like that. So I was like, hey, since I'm testing this live stream thing, would you mind hopping on here and seeing how this goes, just in case it completely crumbles? That is the live stream side that I've been working on. So appreciate that.
I'm also a guinea pig, so there's that.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. So yeah, thanks for coming on with the guinea pig stuff. And then I will make sure that we link to Autism Partnership afterwards. So this article, real quick, I'm going to throw it up again one more time. It's called Fad Treatments and Autism Intervention and Evaluation of Fidget Spinners. So it is in Education and Training in Autism and Developmental Disabilities where it was published. And what I'm hoping to build is just kind of a capacity here for people to be able to, people like yourself to hop on and we can just share what's going on. So let's just freestyle, go with it. What was the premise of the article? And, let's start out there.
Yeah, well, premise was we do some consulting in different school districts. APF doesn't, but Autism Partnership does. And in lots of the different classrooms and lots of different schools, fidget spinners were just all over the place, and it felt like almost overnight. And they were being prescribed for so many different things. It's like, so-and-so's not raising his hand enough, fidget spinner. So-and-so isn't paying attention to the teacher, fidget spinner. So-and-so is having difficulties with math problems, fidget spinner. And we're like, what is going on with these fidget spinners? So I did a search on Amazon, and I think you can still see it now. If you search for fidget spinners on Amazon, the majority of the people that sell them and the descriptions, it will say, you can use fidget spinners. They have been proven to improve concentration, blah, 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 for ADHD, autism, and just casting a wide net there. So we're like, well, if these things are being used and there is research behind it, let's go down this road. Let's see what it is. When I searched for what was in the literature, there was nothing. There was no legit scientific evaluations of the effectiveness of fidget spinners for anything.
And that's actually a trend that happens with, and you introduced this, and the various authors introduced this, where fad treatments just for autism in general are through the roof. I've actually shared on this channel back in the past a project where I used a standard acceleration chart when I got into those to look at the number of fad treatments per year. And we looked at the acceleration and just how prolific those were out there. So that's crazy. But the other thing that I had noted here was you all discussed that it's marketed often before there's actually evidence behind it. And this is one of those, but there's others that do this as well.
Yeah. Fad treatments in autism intervention are rampant. And it feels like for every research study we publish in behavior analysis, there's 20 other fad treatments that are out there that you can look for. Justin started keeping a list and had it in a couple of his presentations and had to limit the number that he put on it because it was just slide after slide after slide. There's just so many.
Yeah, I want to feel like that number is over 100 is what we were looking at years ago. Mm-hmm. It's insane. we do have Julia here, and I want to share with others that are in the comments. If you ever at any point want to like comment, share anything, please drop it in there. I can relay it into the conversation, and we're on like a 20-second delay, so just a heads up to the people that are viewing. Okay, so fidget spinners. How'd you start to investigate this then?
Yeah, well, the first thing we had to actually purchase said fidget spinners, and I feel like that I felt dirty doing it. Like I went onto Amazon and I bought specific ones that had in their description that they improve concentration for autistics or individuals with autism. So that was our first step, and it felt weird. Just using a research budget to buy something like that. But I tried to take Justin's approach that he did with social thinking when we started to evaluate that, like, let's get everything that we can get. But in this case, it was just purchasing the fidget spinners. And then we started to think about, well, in what context would these fidget spinners be used, at least in our clinic? Because we've seen them used, like I said, in so many different ways in the schools. And one way we thought was, well, something we always work on is sustained attending, or how we conceptualize concentration in the study as auditory conditional discrimination. So when you hear an instruction, you respond to it. And if you weren't attending, or if you weren't concentrating, so to speak, you wouldn't be able to respond to that. So we tried to arrange a condition where that's something that the participants would need to do. So do you want me to get really deep into the methods?
I think, I guess the notes that I had here, because since we're on the internet at the end of the day, keeping it the language that we're at is perfect, I think, to make it consumable. One thing I did want to ask you to maybe help me hit on here is just why single subject a little bit. I think we're going to have to put that context out there, just because it's not as typical for some that are out there. So if at some point we can hit, kind of why and how the logic, I guess, would work in this design to try to explain that to people, like why it is significant still. And then, make our way into the results. Maybe we can start with, your just basic setup, who you selected, how that worked. Cool.
Yeah. So this study included 4 children. Only 2 of them had access to the fidget spinner or would be considered participants. And then we paired them up into dyads. And essentially the context would be like story time that you would see in lots of different elementary school classrooms, like kindergarten, first grade, where the teacher is actively reading to the students and they're expected to attend to that book or attend to what the teacher is saying. So we wanted it to resemble that as much as we could. But anytime that you start to add more to a group and try to do research, logistically, it just becomes challenging, because if one kid's absent because they're sick, you can't run that day, and that makes it difficult in terms of conducting consistent research. So we settled on dyads, and we thought about giving the fidget spinner to both of them, but we thought that's not actually what happens in the schools that we see either. It's typically one student who's having challenges. So we are interested in, well, let's create that context as well. So essentially what happened is 2 kids were sitting across the table from me. I pulled out a book and I read them the book. And at some point, one of them was given a fidget spinner. And as I was reading the book, I'd ask questions. In the clinic where we work, we call it secret word, and the kids love it. Typically, you just pick one word, and whenever you hear the word, you tell the kids are supposed to engage in a certain action. So it might be, one of the books was something about a unicorn. If you ever think about getting a unicorn, don't. And so one of the words we picked for that, I think, was unicorn. And it was like, hey, Ryan, every time you hear unicorn, I want you to touch your nose.
Yeah.
And then I'd read the book, state the word at least 10 times throughout the book, and see what they did.
Can you talk real quick, like how you made sure they had the prereq skills and hadn't used them before? Because I think those things are important.
Yeah, well, and can shout out to the reviewers of this manuscript that made sure that we were able to describe the participants in a way that would help other people, because they brought up a great point. Like, if you didn't have the skill to touch your nose, why would I expect you to be able to do that in the first place? And maybe it was that and not something else, like the attending or concentration.
Yeah.
So the participants that were in this study, their case supervisors, or BCPA is typically the term for those people, had noted that they were having trouble successful in that specific context. So they were in groups, and when they were in a group and the teacher was at the front of the class reading a book, they weren't really attending and weren't able to ask questions about the story. And that's kind of how they found out that they weren't really attending or concentrating on what was going on. So that was the first thing that brought them in. And the second thing that brought them in was we wanted to make sure that they could follow simple and multi-step instructions if they were attending to those instructions. So things like, knock on the table or blow a kiss and turn around as a more multi-step. And then once we knew they could do all of those things, we looked for if there was any challenging behavior, because if there was high rates of challenging behavior, we would be targeting that first. We wouldn't necessarily be worrying about this skill in this context.
That's perfect. So how do we measure concentration or attention? Can you describe that?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. Yeah. In this study, at least the way we looked at it, or the way we conceptualized it, was, if we want to use behavior speak, the auditory conditional discrimination, which really was, we're going to give you a word, and once you hear that word, we want you to engage in an action. So like I said, if the word was unicorn, it might be, they'd give the instruction, if every time you hear unicorn, touch your nose. And those were words that sometimes showed up in the text of the book and sometimes did not. So that's how we made sure that it was actually the instruction or hearing the word that was the right stimulus control for them engaging in whatever the conditional discrimination or conditional response was.
Cool. So I think we have a picture here. We've got a couple different children that are working together. You're reading a book. You've got a secret word, and then there's an introduction to the fidget spinner. It's one of them. And then we're measuring to look at the number of different times that those auditory conditional discriminations are just listening and following those sort of instructions of touching your nose during the unicorn, like example. And then maybe, if it's all right with you, can we introduce some of the baseline stuff, like how baseline, fidget, and then behavioral intervention worked? And then I can briefly show these at various points to kind of show some of the results and point it out to people.
Sure. So baseline was, you pretty much explained it. It was me on one side of the table, the two kids on the other side. I'd pull out a book. We'd use 3 different books, and we found books that, the kids that were the same age were really into at the time, because we figured those might be books that they might contact and they'd be age appropriate. So found 3 books and picked 3 different words for each different book. And we just semi-rotated those in a randomized fashion. So you wouldn't get the same book and the same word 2 days in a row, or the same book 2 days in a row. And so as they were seated across to me, I'd pull out the book and say, all right, we're going to read. I really wish I could remember the names.
No worries. I know. I'm asking to remember things that were probably a couple years ago with the publication cycle process. So it's all right.
Although I do remember my favorite one. It was 7, 8, 9, The Untold Story, just because there were lots of puns in there, and I'm a punny kind of guy.
Okay.
But it was like, all right, we're going to read 7, 8, 9, The Untold Story. And as I'm reading it, I want you to listen for me saying 8. And so every time I say 8, I want you to touch your nose. The actions were also randomized and were selected to where it only required one hand to do. Because we were thinking about what would happen in the fidget spinner. We didn't want them to have to set it down to engage in the action. We didn't want any competing behaviors there. And then I just read the book. And it was, like I said, 10 times. So I think it was about 1 every 3 pages. They'd get one of the words. Yeah. And there was no program consequences for if they engaged in the action or didn't engage in the action.
And there was a logic to that, right? Why you don't have the programmed responses?
Yeah, for baseline, we just wanted to see what their skill level was in the absence of any program reinforcement or any program consequences. Yeah, and then we did the same thing once we got to the fidget. So I don't know if you want me to jump into that.
Yeah, let's jump into that. Yeah.
All right. So fidget was exactly the same as baseline, which I think was trying to keep it to where the only thing we changed was the introduction of the fidget spinner. So I would give the instruction, and then after I read the instruction, and I'd hand one of them the fidget spinner and just say, here you go. And then I did everything the exact same way as in baseline. Again, with no program consequences or program contingencies from us. Mm-hmm. And the reason we did that is because nowhere in the advertisement or any of the literature on fidget spinners does it say you also need to use feedback or you also need to use reinforcement. It's just this device itself increases attention, it increases concentration. So put it to the test.
Yeah. And largely speaking, the difference between baseline and fidget?
Not at all. And I think for one participant, it was just like maybe better in baseline at first, and then just
completely
nothing.
flatlined. Yep.
Completely flatlined. And then I think the other one was a little bit variable, but no drastic changes when the fidget spinner was introduced.
Yeah, we're looking for, I shared them quickly here, we're looking for very large changes. So if you have any sort of variance or kind of bounce up and down across those, if they're relatively within the same area of the chart like they are for that participant, that's why we're getting that sort of assumption here. So the second participant where it was just completely flatlined, I was like, wow, like this is super interesting. So then, most folks probably saw this coming, but spoiler alert, behavioral intervention condition, we saw some change. What was that? And what was the condition, I guess, and the results of that?
Yeah, well, initially we weren't thinking about doing this condition whatsoever. We wanted to do a straight up evaluation of the fidget spinners, but when you have data that's the same across your baseline and whatever your other condition is, one argument might be you have no control. You have no experimental control. You didn't really do anything. And the kids needed the skills. That's why they were participating in this study. Their case managers were concerned about their performance in the same context in the absence of the study. So we had to do something. So we leaned on behavior analysis, and essentially what it was is a little bit of differential reinforcement. So both kids were given token boards. And the reason we did it for both kids, even though one was the actual participant or the one that we graphed the data on, was one, I would just feel awful for the other kid if they watched their friend earn tokens and access these cool things while they didn't access any of it, even though they were participating the entire time as well. So we had these token boards that had 3 different levels, and if you filled up one level, it was associated with a differential outcome. So the lowest one, they might be able to, I think they weren't able to access anything. The second tier, if they filled up tokens up to there, they were able to check out some toys we had in a treasure chest that were, maybe the most expensive one was like $5 or something, but some pretty cool, like you go to the Target one spot, there's some pretty sweet things there. Or Toys R Us, rest in peace. We get lots of cool toys in there, just chuck them in there. And then if they filled up the entire token board, which would mean they responded correctly on every trial, they got to take one of those things home. They got to actually physically keep it. And lo and behold, once we put that intervention in, you can see a huge difference, and they acquired the skill.
That's super cool. And it's I guess there's, to play the devil's advocate here, because we both are trained in single subject design and like analysis in this sort of format. Like, can you give a pitch to people on why we can believe and how far we can extrapolate these sort of results when we're talking about 2 participants?
Yeah. Well, I'd be cautious in trying to extrapolate it too far, because this is one study, 2 kids, one very specific context, one very specific skill.
Cool.
So for these 2 kids, the fidget spinner was definitely not effective, and the behavioral intervention was highly effective. For these 2 kids in this condition, I think we say somewhere in there, like the repeated conditions and the 2 participants represent some form of replication, but more replication is going to be needed before we can make larger sweeping statements about it.
I think that's a good comment, real quick, if I can interrupt, is the replication usually is structured in different ways for like larger end studies with more participants. So when you have a single subject case analysis like this, what you are, so single subject case design as they talk about it, you have the replication built within. So the few times that I shared it, where you had baseline, fidget, baseline, that's where you're getting replication, and you can start to believe these results for that particular person more and more and more each time you replicate those sort of things within that person's own graph or data or experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm a big fan of Tris Smith's work and how he talked about research and going from single subject to the larger end studies. And we thought about doing a larger scale study with this, or a larger population or a group design, but that would wash out any potential individual differences for us, because there weren't any studies that have looked at, well, if the fidget spinner is effective, what are the conditions under which it is and is not? And the large end scales, or the large end studies, wouldn't allow us to really hammer that out or look into that. So with the single subject design, we could see, well, with Brett, were they effective? And if they were, why? And with Jermaine, if they weren't effective, why? And so we could start to look at what are the conditions under which fidget spinners are or not effective. And essentially what this study represents is one condition where it's definitely not effective.
Yeah, cool. That's fantastic. Is there more that you wanted to add on to this whole pitch and where we could go next with the idea if someone's finding this?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any researchers out there that'd like to replicate it, like jump on, because I think since this one got accepted and published, there was one other one in a behavioral journal. I'm not sure where it is, but I mean, that's the thing about research studies. I think somewhere in here we said this was the first of our that we're aware of.
Yep, I remember reading that.
Yeah, but I mean, this one was completed in 2018, so we're talking like it takes forever for this stuff to get out and for people to learn about it. So maybe there's some people that are already working on some replications and stuff. I think that'd be great. And I think maybe if you work in school districts, or if you find yourself in school districts or find people recommending fidget spinners, this might be opening the door to a conversation about fidget spinners or fad treatments in autism more broadly. Might open the door to some of it.
Do you have some resources that I can maybe share with people on like where you start to look for these? So like, for example, asatonline.org has been a fantastic resource that I point people towards. Mm-hmm. Is there any others that might be useful to like start to sort out this fad treatment in autism and just get different perspectives and consume, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think ASAT is a wonderful place to start. If you want to dive deeper, I think it's the Fox and Mullock Fad Treatments in Autism book. Cool. I could be off in either the title or how I'm pronouncing the author's name, but
no
I think that's a wonderful source. And I think Normand, 2008, I think we cited in this paper, has an article in Behavior Analysis and Practice on science skepticism and applied behavior analysis. I think that's a wonderful paper.
Cool. Awesome.
And really anything, I just keep on thinking about more. Anything Jason Travers does is, he's been looking a lot into pseudoscience and fad treatments for a long time. So you can talk to him at a conference or go hear any of his talks. I think that's also a great resource.
Let's see, we have one comment real quick. So I remember asking, I always feel like if I don't pre-read these first, I could potentially get myself in a tight spot. But here we go. I remember asking a teacher why we were using fidget spinners after a conference with Ron Leaf. It was an eye-opening when she rolled her eyes and sighed and said, "We can't fix these kids, we're just coping." Do you think the articles like this help perspectives like that?
That's a good question. I think it makes me think of the interview that you did with Hank Schlinger, where he's like, if someone feels like this is helping them, I'm all for it. So if someone thinks that fidget spinners are helping them out, they enjoy it, they enjoy interacting with them, like go and do it. I'm not saying like Ryan never use a fidget spinner, but it's when there's purported effects or treatment effects or therapeutic effects of using it that I think becomes concerning. And so I hope that something like this could help open the door to a method that you could use in a school setting with a teacher that wants to use fidget spinners. It's like, all right, well, let's evaluate it in a way in which we can see if it's effective or if it isn't effective in a really easy way. And hopefully maybe some of these methods could translate to that situation fairly closely. So it doesn't have to be I want to use fidget spinners, you shouldn't use fidget spinners, you're stupid, don't ever do it kind of a thing. It's more collaborative, and it's let's look at this, let's see if it's actually helping, because like I said, this is just one study, and there might be conditions under which fidget spinners are great or have some great therapeutic effects. I just don't know of them yet because there hasn't been the research.
I appreciate that, Ben, on kind of social validity and like respecting the person's perspective, what's going on, but also the idea there of like we've got to balance this with a little bit of philosophical doubt and see like where the data goes elsewhere. That's like great. This is for anyone watching afterward. That's what you want to see in a behavior analyst. I love it, man. There was one thing I want to add to that real quick was there's I guess to add to that context, there's some quotes that you put in here that are specifically looking at the marketing text that's used. And I think part of the reason this is important is like one of them says, quote, enhance your focus, help to relieve anxiety, ADD, ADHD sufferers, and autism. It's like there's language put in the marketing that could put some false hope, or probably puts a lot of false hope potentially if this is like the only thing you've ever found. That's part of fad treatments too, is I guess the reason for doing these research is to build up more evidence under the conditions for the conditions which, they may or may not work, so that we just have a more educated way to make these decisions for people that are trying to figure out what to do. And I guess that's the heart of this that I wanted to kind of maybe resonate with a little bit more, which is people that have written books around this experience. When you receive that diagnosis, or your child does, you're looking for whatever works. And so if we've got marketing context out there that's saying, hey, this is going to work, and it doesn't, it causes issues and you lose time, right? Like very precious, valuable time.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful point. And I think that's what kind of first got me interested in this outside of seeing it in schools. Like as soon as I did a Google search or Amazon search and saw the marketing text, I was like, what? And the marketing text without any evidence to support those claims whatsoever. So it made me think about the people that might contact this. And it's like, well, I'm going to use fidget spinner as my first line of defense without actually knowing if it's going to be helpful or not, and lose that time.
Yeah. So if there's any comments, questions, or different perspectives afterwards, I'm definitely going to cut this in and include this. So let's share them down below.